we're back. Glad you're with us. This is Dr. Kelly Nelson Birks, and you are enjoying, hopefully, the 15th installment tonight of the Second Coming series, brought to you by the membership and attenders of Messiah Reformed Church here in Omaha, Nebraska. Nebraska, you say? Yeah, Nebraska. Glad you're with us tonight, today, wherever it is in the world, whatever time of day or night it is when you're listening to this. Hopefully this will be of great benefit to all of you. I know many of you have continued to keep on with us through all. Now tonight will be the 15th installment of the Second Coming series, and hopefully it's been of great benefit to you. I know we've received lots of different emails and communiques and tweets on Twitter and all that business, reflecting folks who are listening and watching and with questions, and things are turning around for them, and that's a blessing for us to hear that. You know, all we're trying to do, we're not trying to revolutionize anything. We just want to bring the meaning of the Scriptures to you through a thorough exegetical, not just word for word, but grammatical, historical type of approach that has been in the church, since the first and especially the second century, with the work of the Christian exegetes that went on in Antioch, and so we're pleased to be a part of that tradition as well. And we're glad you're with us and staying with us throughout all of this. So here's what I'm going to do. A lot of times I review a lot of things that we did the last time. I'm just going to hit that pretty fast right now because we are right in the middle of the Olivette Discourse. The Olivette Discourse, and we're working it out of Matthew 24. So if you've got a Bible nearby, why don't you grab a hold of it, maybe something to take some notes with. That would be a good idea. Jot down some thoughts, some things you'll want to check out later, and go with us to the 24th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Gospel of Matthew, 24th chapter. I like Matthew's version, and we're going to spend some time also cross-referencing with Luke's version, because Luke tonight, especially with what we're going to be covering in the Olivette Discourse, Luke really helps enlighten us, us non-Hebraic thinking, Hebraic talking individuals, and some of you understand what I mean by that. But he really helps us to interpret Matthew's gospel and Matthew's verbiage in particular. Matthew was written to Jewish believers predominantly, as best we can tell. My opinion is that Matthew was in fact the first gospel. I think probably the majority of scholars out there lean towards the idea of it being Mark, but I think there are presuppositions relative to the shortness of it that seems to appeal reasonably to certain scholars, thinking that as time would go on, more words would be added to the material, the gospel material, say out of Mark, and that is of course what has happened with Matthew and then Luke, and of course John has not really one of the synoptics. It deals with information in the life of Christ that is a little bit outside of the synoptics, although some things are the same. But in any case, I think Matthew really was first out the gate. I think the apostles, Matthew in particular, being the former tax collector, that he was writing to those within the Jerusalem, we'll say Palestinian area, and writing to Jewish believers of that time. And he uses a lot of Hebraisms, a lot of Jewish catchphrase, a lot of Jewish slang that we normally would not understand as slang. And unfortunately, much of the church historically, and the commentators historically in the church, have taken certain things in a sort of Greco-Roman literalism. You know, sun, moon, and stars really does mean the sun, moon, and stars. So they're taking a cosmological sort of approach to planets and stars actually burning out or falling down onto the earth, and they've taken this kind of a popular bent to it. And the problem with that is that was done separated from Hebraic and Jewish influence on the church, especially towards the end of the first century and as we head towards the middle of the second century. And we've talked about a lot of that already. We'll be touching on some of those things tonight in particular. Now, so far what we've done is we've started actually in the end of the 23rd chapter, where Jesus sets up as he's speaking to the scribes and the Pharisees, and he's telling them, for instance, that all the righteous blood shed upon them, chapter 23, verse 35, from Abel, brother of Cain, to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah. He's the author of the prophecy of Zechariah, 14 chapters, just before the end, right in front of Malachi in the end of the Old Testament, whom they slew between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, verse 36, all these things will come upon this Genia. Genia means my contemporaries. That's the feature phrase and meaning in regards to that word. That genos, the other word that can be translated as generation, does not have. And Jesus and the writers here in Matthew and as well as in Luke only, and in Mark, only have Jesus using the word genia. Jesus never uses the word genos. And there's a reason for that. He keeps it focused on, I'm coming back to this first century audience. My parousia, or second coming, as it's popularly known, and as Hebrews 9:28 refers to the second coming as the second time, that it's going to be within the lifetime of some of these people alive in this first century generation, these my contemporaries. We spent lots of time dealing with all of that. Matthew 16:27 and 28, insurmountable passages that mean exactly what you always thought they meant, but because of popular thinking and futuristic thinking that has held sway because it's exciting, Jesus is coming back, mark of the beast, and all of the stuff that's been invented over time that has really served as a true distraction from the real glory and reality of what the New Testament teaches, and some of the Old Testament, in regards to the meaning of the timing of the second coming. And we're going to be moving through some of that tonight. Jesus then puts his focus upon the city of Jerusalem and upon the temple in particular in verse 37 of chapter 23. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets, stones those who are sent to you, so on and so forth. Verse 38, behold, your house is being made to you, being left to you desolate. I say to you, from now on you will not see me until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And then 24:1, Jesus came out of the temple, and going away, when his disciples came to point out the buildings of the temple, he said, do you not see all these things? Now remember, they came and pointed out the buildings of the temple because they heard what he said in chapter 23 verse 38. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. And so they're reacting to this. That's why they're showing him these buildings. It's not like Jesus had never seen the buildings of the temple before. Of course he had, lots of times, right? But now what are they doing? There's nothing new for them to show him. No, they're reacting to Jesus' statement that your house is going to be desolate. They recognize that he was talking to them about the temple. Jesus then affirms that by then pointing out to them, do you see all these things? Verse 2 of chapter 22. Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be torn down. And that matches back with 23:38. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. The house of the Lord was also another name for the temple there in Jerusalem. And then he leaves, and he walks up the side of Mount Olivette, as it is there on the east side of Jerusalem, and the west side of the mountain facing the east side of Jerusalem, and that's the side where the temple is on, and you just got a bird's eye view of the entire Temple Mount right there. And Jesus begins to give now what we call the Olivette Discourse, this eschatological sermon, eschatology meaning the study of last things, this eschatological sermon now that he gives that amplifies the meaning for why he comes back the second time. And this is what we have shown you several times already. We want to keep this evermost in your mind as we're moving through the Olivette Discourse. Jesus comes back the second time. He comes back in the lifetime of some of those alive in the first century. He says specifically, and we're going to see more of it tonight, that the earthly sign, the earthly non-heavenly sign is the destruction of the temple. That sign points to his parousia, or his second coming. And he keeps telling the boys, the apostles, there's 4 of them here right now. According to Mark 13, there's Peter, James, John, and Andrew. And he keeps referring to them in the second person plural. or one of the words that's attached to that would be in the second person, in the plural form. And he's always saying, you will see, you will experience, all of you will see, all of you will experience. You see, it's never all the way throughout the entire 24th chapter and into the 25th chapter. That's the Olivette Discourse right there. He never takes the focus off of his contemporaries alive with him in the first century as being those who would experience these things at no time and nowhere, and it can't be found, and I challenge you to try to find it. At no place in the Olivette Discourse, in any of the synoptics, can you find Jesus referring to a yet future event that is outside of the first century, that would happen and be a part of his second coming, that is outside of the first century. You won't find it. It doesn't exist. It's not there. Please be my guest and do let me know if you think you have found it. And if you do, I think that'd be a great thing to bring up on one of our programs. So we're going to do that. Also, I want to remind you, just before we leap back into where we left off, I want to remind you, I think that probably for installment number 16, so that'll be next week's installment number 16, I think we're going to go ahead with our special question and answer program. Elder Brian tells me that he's got like 53 different questions from you guys. So, oh my gosh, 7-second answers for each one. I'm not so sure about that. This may go on for a while. We may have to have more than one program to cover this. But anyway, next week you'll see myself and you'll see Elder Brian sitting up here with me, and that'll be exciting. And I want you to meet him. He's one of the pastors here at Messiah Reformed Church. So Jesus takes off into this whole thing. I should also say that if you do want to get a hold of me, it's Dr. Kelly Nelson Birks, right? That's our website, drkellynelsonburks.com, which you've seen before, but just in case you've missed this, also you're seeing right here on the screen, my personal email address is ktestifytotruth@aol.com. You can write me there. I do my best to get back at you, but if I don't get back in a timely manner, please understand, it's just swamping. It's just sometimes overloading. So that's me whipping out in front of you, is what that is. And please do go ahead and give us some activity on Twitter, and it's at Dr. Kelly Birks. Is that it? At Dr. Kelly Birks. That's the Twitter shot. And then we also, what's the last one? Facebook. You can go to our Messiah Reformed Church homepage on Facebook. Please like us, I don't know, or dislike us. Right in there, I really dislike you, Dr. Birks, something like that. Let us know you're there. And that's, of course, on Facebook. You can look us up in the little bar up on the top right there. All right, good enough. That's enough of that right there. Let's jump back into this. Jesus is responding now to them in regards to they're saying, man, look at the temple. What do you mean all these stones are going to be thrown down? Last week I emphasized to you that the Jews really held this as an idol. This temple had become quite the idol. It is the meaning, the religious, spiritual, political, identifying meaning of all Israel and really their God in regards to what went on in the temple and so on. Jesus says it is coming down, and then they ask him in verse 3. They finally say, it's like they're giving in. They say, it's like, oh, okay, well, they say, tell us, when will these things happen? When will these things happen? In other words, when will not one stone here be left upon another till it's all thrown down? When will your house be left unto you desolate? When, chapter 23, verse 34 and 35, when will the prophets and wise men and scribes come? And when will the guilt of all the blood of the righteous from Abel to Zechariah be held accountable to these scribes and Pharisees? All of that. When will these things happen? And then the second question, what? Now we're in the middle of verse 3, chapter 24, verse 3. What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So they ask for it's a timing question. When will these things happen? And he keeps telling them, you will see, you will experience, all of you will. Not some other generation. Now, it would be within that generation. That's in keeping with everything Jesus taught about the timing of his parousia. Parousia, of course, being the Greek word for an arrival with a consequential presence. That's the primary Greek word that is used throughout the New Testament in regards to the second coming. You should probably know that by now, and you probably do. When will these things happen? And then what will be the sign of your coming? So we go from timing, what's the timing? When can we basically expect this? And then what is the nature of it? That's what means in the question. How will this happen? What is the nature of this event? And the event being, what will be the sign of your coming? Now that's an important phrase, bottom of verse 3. The sign of your coming and the end of the age, the centulias to eonas, which we've spent lots of time with, and we've seen other passages here that places the centulias to eonas, or the end of the age, or the completion of the age, in the first century. There is no use of that phrase that's got it somewhere outside of the first century. Nowhere in the future past AD 70. Clear as crystal. So, when will be these things happen? What will be the sign of your coming? Now, we're going to hit that sign of your coming pretty hard tonight, because we're going to get to that point where Jesus is talking about that. And allow me then to just let that much until we get to really verse 13 of the 24th chapter. Let that be the review to get us to where we need to go, starting with tonight, because we're going to fire into the 15th verse. We're really going to move through this. I want to really get through to at least the 31st verse, 15 through 31. So I told you this was going to be an overview. You come and visit us at Messiah Church, and we may take entire teachings out of one verse, maybe two verses or something like that. Really take our time and squeeze that, that good Bible theology right out of the text like a thick, wet sponge. But other times it's overview. It's more beneficial to do that. And my purpose in doing the Olivette Discourse is so that you can review and utilize all the information I've given you up to this point where we started the Olivette Discourse. That was all preparation. Those first, 11 installments, 12 installments, I don't know. Those were all preparation to get us to this time. So you would have the means to interpret the Olivette Discourse, because without that foundation, what does it mean when Jesus talks about the sun, moon, and stars? What does it mean when he talks about the abomination of desolation? Why does he refer to the end of the age, or the centulios to eonas? What does all that mean? What does it mean to be in the last days? What were the last days? What did that constitute? And so on and so forth. All that was necessary to get us to this point. So now I want you to catch some context, because what we're going to do is we're going to fire into verse 15 of chapter 24, but I want you to see the context in which this 15th verse sits, because we're going to compare, and you can get your finger in it right now if you want, Luke the 21st chapter. You just sort of hold this Matthew 24 spot right here, and then get yourself over to the 21st chapter of Luke. Hold that, and then go back to Matthew. We're gonna compare these two passages. We're going to see that the contexts are exactly the same, and the reason that's important is because I'm going to interpret for you tonight what is meant in verse 15. I'm going to interpret for you what's meant in verse 15. You're looking at it. When he says, all of you will see the abomination of desolation, we're going to interpret that through Luke's version of the Olivette Discourse in Luke 21, and specifically verse 20, starting right in there. We're going to look at the context up and below. We're going to see that the context of Luke 21, where the abomination of desolation falls, only it's called something different in Luke 21. Luke gives us the interpretation of what Matthew is calling to the Hebrews, using a Hebraic phrase, abomination of desolation. It's taken out of the prophecy of Daniel. But Luke is not writing to a Jew or to Jews like Matthew is. Matthew can be free in using these Hebraisms because he's writing to a people that understand this slang. It carries over from the writings of the prophets and so on. But over in Luke's gospel, he's writing to a gentleman named Theophilus. See, Luke and the book of Acts, Luke authored both of them, in case you didn't know that. And they're sort of like, they go together. They come in a set. So Luke is a two-volume scenario. And he has a gospel, and then he has the Acts of the apostles, or the Acts of the Holy Holy Spirit that take place after Jesus ascends and pours out the Holy Spirit, pours out the gifts upon the church. Those two books go together right there. But both of those books are written to a man named Theophilus, a single gentleman, as far as we know, a single individual, I should say. I don't know about his married state. But Theophilus, and it's not to be expected that he understands these Hebraisms. So Luke interprets those same type of Hebraisms that are in Matthew's gospel, only he just lays it out straight as to meaning for Theophilus. So that's what we're going to do right here. Now, Matthew 24 is where we're at, looking at verse 13. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. That will be the end of the age, because bottom of verse 3, you see bottom of verse 3, the centulios, translated as end of the age, that's what that's referring to. So verse 13 is talking about the end of the age. The one who endures to the end will be saved or will be delivered. Okay, how will they be delivered? Well, just write Matthew 10:23 in right there. Matthew 10:23. You guys, Jesus will say to his 12, will not be getting throughout all of the cities of Israel, running from their persecutors in that Matthew 10 context, until the Son of Man be come, until I come back. He comes back to deliver them. And then also make a note, right next to verse 13, of further on in Matthew 24, of verse 31. Verse 31, that's where Jesus returns, and he returns in a very specific way, and he sends forth his angels, and they gather together his elect. See, these are the ones who endure to the end, that are sozo, they are saved, or the word can be translated delivered in Matthew 24, verse 13. Verse 13, right? With me on that? And then he says, very interesting, verse 14, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole oikumene, translated as world, but it means the world of the Roman Empire, the oikumene. This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in the whole oikumene as a testimony to the nations. Then, once the whole world, the whole oikumene, that's the world of the Roman Empire, right? Once that gospel goes into all of those nations of the Roman Empire, then the end would come. So he's interpreting, he's answering their question at the bottom of verse 3, isn't he? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Well, one of the signs of his coming that brings the end of the age, or the end will come, will be, according to verse 14, the gospel going out to the entire Roman Empire, which it did. And we spent lots of time with you the last time we were together dealing with other corroborating passages like Colossians 1:6 and Colossians 1:23 and Romans 1:8 and Romans the 16th chapter. We took you into other passages that talks about the fact that at that time when Paul wrote to the Colossians, wrote to the Romans, about the mid-50s, AD 54, AD 55, he makes these statements in those passages that the gospel had already gone out into the whole world. It was done. It was bearing fruit. So they knew what Jesus taught, Matthew 24, verse 14. They knew that this was done. And so you talk about looking up all the time, right? Like over in Luke 21, when you see all these things happen, look up. It means be attentive. It doesn't mean walk around, like a dingbat looking up in the sky, walking, across the street and getting hit by a semi or something. It means be expectant. Look up. Be expectant. Your redemption draws nigh. Notice that in the second coming, it's referred to as a redemption. It's referred to as a redemption, right? And it is. Look at verse 13. He who endures to the end will be what? Saved, delivered. It's the same idea of redemption, being a purchase price being paid for, and then that one who pays the purchase receives you. Verse 31, where he sends forth his angels, great sound of a trumpet. They gather together his elect from the four winds of heaven, and so on and so forth. And of course, oh my gosh, there's lots of Hebrews, the 9th chapter and the 28th verse. For those who look for him, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. And he says to them in the first century, for those who look for him, he will appear the second time. That's where we get the phrase, the second coming of Christ. Hebrews 9:28. Those who look for him the second time, he will appear, not to deal with sin like he did in his first coming, going to the cross, dealing with sin, but to bring what? Salvation. See, what does it say in 24:13? He who endures to the end will be saved. What else does it say in Luke 21? Look up, when you see all these things, look up, for your redemption draws nigh. Romans the 13th chapter, verse 10, verse 11, verse 12, right in that area right there. Romans 10, verse 11, 12, 13, that entire area, talks about the fact that our salvation is nearer. He says this to the Romans in the first century, around AD 55, that our salvation is nearer than when we first believed. What does that mean? It's not another reference to another kind of justification by faith. They already had their justification / salvation. But now he's talking about, with the passing of time, your salvation has gotten nearer than when you first believed. Because the second coming is a salvation completing move by the Godhead. That's the meaning of that. And the Savior stays. The Savior stays. However, in the Olivette Discourse, it's very important for you to understand that nowhere in the Olivette Discourse, I know you're going to hate this, but this is you're getting things removed. It's like going to the doctor or going to the dentist, and that tooth, baby, those teeth, they be rotten, they be stinking, and they got to come out. Well, you've got some rotten, stinking ideas that the church has proposed throughout the centuries and has been brought into creeds and confessions without any consideration of context or audience relevancy statements concerning the meaning of the timing of when Christ would come. They just took the futuristic statements to them, to the Thessalonians, to the Corinthians, to the Romans, right? Because that was all pre-AD 70 when that was written, and the writers of the Creeds and Confessions just took those futuristic statements to them and transferred it over, in the 1500s, 1600s, earlier than that, actually, if you'll excuse me, and they just transferred that over. I mean, you go all the way to the 4th century, 325, with the Council of Nicaea and the councils, the 7 ecumenical councils that thereafter. None of them studied any eschatology, but they all put in at the end of their creeds or confessions that they all believed in some way that Jesus was still due to come back in their future. See? Because they weren't paying attention to who the writer to the Romans, to Matthew, to these first century writers, they weren't paying attention to who these statements were being directed to. That's just a fact, ladies and gentlemen. That is a fact, Jack. They weren't paying attention to who was getting these statements, and then they were being carried along by presuppositions as to the nature of how Jesus would appear, you see. It had to be, the biggest fireworks show in the sky that you would ever see, 6-foot-tall Jesus coming, blasting with all that. They took Hebraic phraseology and they literalized it. They gave it through the sieve of a Greco-Roman cosmological literalistic interpretive grid. Is what they did. And that's why we have always had, up to this day, people still looking down the road waiting for Jesus to show up. Looking down the road. Where is he? I got a tap on my shoulder going on over here. It's Jesus. Yeah, I've been here all this time. Why are you looking over there? Okay, maybe that wasn't funny. And so consequently, when we talk about this end coming, he's talking about the end of the age. Then the end of the age would come, all right? So you've seen that. Pay a special attention now to 24:13, and now we're looking at 15, and now I got to roll, okay? Here we go, verse 15. Therefore, Jesus says, when you see, all of you see, when all of you, Peter, James, John, and Andrew, when all of you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel, the prophet, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then let those who are in Judea, they must flee to the mountains. Then let those who are in Judea, they must flee to the mountains, all right? So catch that now. Now let's look at 15. Therefore, when you see, the therefore, of course, being a reference to the fact that verse 14, the gospel of the kingdom would be preached in the whole Roman Empire, and then the end would come. It would be a testimony of the nations, then the end would come. Therefore, so when he says, when you see, that's eidete in Greek. It's a second person plural form for seeing. seeing, understanding, perceiving is the idea, but it's second person plural. So it means all of you guys that I'm talking to, Jesus speaking to these four guys on the Mount of Olives, keeping right within the arena of the Matthew 16, 27 and 28, Matthew 10, 23, Matthew 26, 64, and other passages like that, where he said that those alive in the first century would see and experience his parousia or his second coming. All of the passages that deal with that say, put it in that way. Therefore, when all of you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet. What is this abomination of desolation? Well, the first thing we notice is that it's not something that's still off in our future, is it? Because it says right out the gate that these guys would see it. They would see this abomination of desolation. See the abomination of desolation. All right, now at this point, hold your spot right here in Matthew 24:15. Flip back to Luke 21. And look at verse 19. We're going to go 19, 20, and 21 and 22. Luke 21:19. By your endurance you will gain your lives. You know what that means? That means he who endures to the end will be saved. Luke puts it a different way. By your endurance, 21:19 of Luke, you will gain your lives or gain your souls. In other words, you'll be saved. This is the same thing as he who endures to the end will be saved. And you should put right next to verse 19 right here, you should pencil in Matthew 24:13. Matthew 24:13, unless you have it in your margin or something like that. Draw attention to it. So Matthew 24:13, the one who endures to the end will be saved. So I want you to see the context. Just like in Matthew 24:13 precedes, along with 14, precedes verse 15 of Matthew 24. I want you to see that the same verbiage, although it's a little different, of course, but the meaning is the same. It's preceding verse 20 here in Luke 21. All right, so now we're back in Luke 21, and now we're looking at verse 20. Verse 20 of Luke 21 is going to interpret Matthew 24:15. But when all of you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. What did Matthew 23:38 say? Behold, your house is left to you desolate. Luke 21, verse 20, recognize that her desolation is near. What did Jesus say in Matthew 24, verse 2? Not stone here, one stone here will be left upon another, which will not be thrown down. Your house is left to you desolate. What does Matthew 24:15 say? Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, and when the Romans showed up, they desolated the entire city. How is this connected to Luke 21:20? Well, let's analyze Luke 21:20. He says, but when all of you, second person plural, see, so they're going to see this. They're going to see it, they're going to experience it. If they didn't, then Jesus is a liar and he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a false prophet, and why are you bothering following him? Right? See, if you don't embrace preterism, you're embracing some other Jesus that is not biblical, because Jesus never taught what you believe. Still coming, still on his way. If he is, then this book is not inspired. Jesus lied. He's a false prophet. And it's time to go find something else to do. Let's go. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, see that next phrase? That is the interpretive means by which Matthew is being interpreted in Matthew 15. Matthew says when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. I'm not going to take you there to that right now. I think you can do that on your own. I just want you to see what the interpretation is. So in Matthew 24:15, the abomination of desolation is what? It's when Jerusalem is surrounded by armies. Is that not correct? Well, sure. And as a result of that, they are to recognize that the desolation of Jerusalem, like it says in verse 20, Luke 21:20, the desolation of Jerusalem is near. Then you've heard me talk about this before. This is an amazing historical fact. When Nero sent the first set of armies and his 10-nation confederacy into Jerusalem, I had to remember which leg I had on which leg now. Now I need to flip over this one. Okay. When he first sent that first 10-nation confederacy, he sent it under General Cestus Gallus. Cestus Gallus surrounded Jerusalem. The members of, the high-ranking members and the soldiers of Cestus Gallus's Roman 10-nation confederacy army came in selectively, came in through the gates of Jerusalem. They had the place. And remember, the place was loaded with pilgrims because they showed up during the Passover season. So that was one of the 3 mandatory feasts that the Jewish males were supposed to attend there in Jerusalem. The place was absolutely packed, right? And so this takes place at that point, and they come in through the city gates and they begin to set up their pagan standards that have the pictures, which are an abomination to the Jews, and abominates the place, the holy place, which is Jerusalem. That's the city of the living God, Jesus said, while he was on earth. And they begin to abominate that place. They start to offer sacrifices. They start to burn incense, giving thanks to their foreign gods, their pagan gods, for this victory in Jerusalem. And they are abominating the place. They are desolating the place. It's just the beginning of desolations, right? That's the meaning of this. This is fascinating. But now something happened. Something, and we don't have an explanation for this, but Josephus talks about it. I believe Tacitus talks about it. It's either in the annals, the annals of Imperial Rome, or the histories. I frankly forget which one it's in right now. But they corroborate this along with Josephus. For some reason, Cestus Gallus orders his soldiers to pull back away from surrounding, orders them to pull back. It's at that moment that history tells us that all of the Jewish Christians that were there in Jerusalem saw this and were reminded that this is what the Lord preached to them about in the Olivette Discourse in Matthew 24, in Luke 21, for instance, that when you see the city surrounded by armies, you were supposed to do something. Well, now, according to Matthew 24 and verse 16, after you see the abomination of desolation, then verse 16 of Matthew 24 says, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, right? All right, then you look back at Luke 21, and you see after verse 20, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. What are they supposed to do? Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Those who are in the midst of the city must leave. Oh, those who are in the midst of the city must leave. Those who are in the country must not go back into the city. All right, let me hold off on verse 22 for a second. And they were looking for that, and that's exactly what they did. They were paying attention. See, the first century Jewish Christians were paying attention. They were paying attention to the signs of their times that they were living in. These are not signs for you and I to pay attention to past AD 70. That's crazy. It's crazy. We don't pay. What are you talking about? No, no, no. They are supposed to flee. They are supposed to run. So it's important to see that the context of both Matthew 24, 15 and 16, and Luke 21, 20, 21, 22, that those are the same context, that it's time to run. And they all headed north. They left the city. The Romans let them go. They headed north, and they ended up at Pella, and they waited out the Jewish war from AD 66 to the summer of AD 70 up in Pella. Predominantly, that was a place of safety for them. So they ran. They knew this is what it was. And then to talk about look up, because when you see these happenings, your redemption draws nigh. What an exciting time. I'm sorry, but that excitement is not for you to experience. That was for our first century brethren and sisterin to experience, not you and I. Okay? Now look at verse 22 here. I want to draw your attention to Luke 21 and verse 22. Luke 21 and verse 22. I'm going to do this for all the full preterists out there. I'm just going to do this once, so listen up. 22. But these are the days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Full preterists like to say that all predictive prophecy was fulfilled by AD 70. all predictive prophecy, whether Old Testament or New Testament, was fulfilled by AD 70, and there is absolutely nothing left to be fulfilled. And what they do is they go to this verse right here to try to back that up, and that's a mistake. They're making a mistake. What does the text say? Verse 22, because these are the days of vengeance. These. Well, what's the these referring back to? Well, it's referring back to verse 19, by your endurance, all of you will gain your lives. And when all of you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, notice its desolation is near, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Those who are in the midst of the city must leave. Those who are in the country must not enter the city, because these are the days of vengeance. So he's talking about those days, middle 22, so that all things which are written must be fulfilled. They just love that. They just chomp on that with, these, fix-it-in teeth or something like that. All these things which are written must be fulfilled. All these things written about what? About Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, about the people fleeing. The references in Daniel, for instance, Daniel 12, that those things would be fulfilled. A lot of people, full preterists, like to go to a passage like that is illegitimate. This is talking about the days of vengeance relative to God's vengeance upon the kingdom of Judea under Rome, and those people at that time relative to the vengeance that would take place that Jesus talked about, for instance, back in Matthew 24, and especially Matthew 23, where he talks about in verse 35 that upon them the guilt of all the righteous blood shed on the earth, Abel to Zechariah, would fall upon them, and that generation would experience these things, verse 36. That's what he's talking about right there. Not that all predictive prophecy will be fulfilled. We still have predictive prophecy that is yet to be fulfilled and is ongoing right now. It is being fulfilled. I'm not going to talk about that right now. Maybe you should write in and ask a question, and so I'll entertain it or something like that. All right, back to Matthew 24. Now I'm going to kick it in the gas here. We're going to do some slow down, then some speed up, and some slow down and some speed up. So after we understand what the abomination of desolation is, that's where the Roman armies came through and abominated, desolated the holy place, which was Jerusalem. They were standing in the holy place. This doesn't mean some fictitious antichrist individual who stands in a rebuilt Jewish temple in Israel, in Jerusalem, and then takes his seat. I know you just want to cross-reference this over to 2 Thessalonians 2, but there is no corroborative bridge between this and 2 Thessalonians 2. You can't even go there. That's the man of lawlessness over there. Where does the Bible say that the Antichrist and the man of lawlessness are one and the same? It doesn't. It doesn't say that. That's just your presupposition working overtime, taking you further and further and further away from the meaning of this text. Don't do that. Don't do that. Man of lawlessness, another subject. Well, is there not going to be a future Antichrist? The Bible doesn't teach that. Where's the Antichrist in the book of Revelation? Folks in here are going, there isn't any. Yeah, there isn't any. No, there is no Antichrist in the book of Revelation. Well, it all depends upon you. Who's the beast then, kind of a thing. Well, come on over. Just wait, I'll get to it. It's being put on YouTube. It's being recorded. I'm going through Revelation right now here at Messiah Church. We'll get to all of that, but it's not some fictitious single-person Antichrist. Doesn't exist. You know when the term Antichrist shows up? And this is germane, to understanding verse 15. I got to sweep this away. There's only two books, only two places where the term Antichrist shows up. 1 John and 2 John, right? 1 John, the 2nd chapter and the 4th chapter, and then 2 John. In all of those passages, it is many different individuals that are referred to as Antichrist, and it's anybody who denies that Jesus the Messiah came in an earthly, fleshly body. That's who the Antichrist is. The Antichrist could be anybody that denies that. That is the spirit of Antichrist. That is the Antichrist. That's the only Antichrist the Bible talks about. That's it. A lot of books are being sold, a lot of DVDs are being sold, a lot of people are spending a lot of money getting to these various futuristic conferences. I know who the Antichrist is, blah, 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 blah. Huge waste of time. In the meantime, Jesus is here ruling and reigning, and you are wasting your time. Verse 16, let those then who are in Judea, they must flee to the mountains. He continues with that idea. Whoever is on the housetop, there in Jerusalem when the armies show up, who's ever on the housetop must not go down to get the things out that are in his house. That tells us that you can't waste time. Jesus is saying there's just a short window of time right here for you to get out of Jerusalem. When you see, when you hear, people are talking about it, that the Roman armies are surrounding, and they have just pulled back. You need to be ready to go, go, go. That's what it means right there in verse 17. Don't go down and get the things which are in your house. 18, whoever is in the field working, his job out in the field, must not turn back to get his cloaks. Short, small window of time to get out. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. Yeah, it's just very tough on a pregnant woman. It's like, go, put her on a donkey or something. Put her in the back of a cart, or something like that. It's going to be very hard on women with children, and there were plenty of that. Christian ladies with children, or those who have already had their babies and are nursing them, and they've got to care for the babies, and all this jostling around, and they got to get out. They're fleeing for their lives so that they don't get trapped in that cauldron of judgment where there's going to be a bloodbath over the next 3.5 years, predominantly done by the Jews and the zealots within, wrestling for control within Jerusalem. We talk about that in our Revelation study here every other Sunday morning. Verse 20, Jesus says, but pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. He says, ask God. Ask God that the weather is in your favor. Man, we live in the Midwest. They do have snow in Jerusalem occasionally. That does get some snow. But you're heading north, and there is snow in those areas heading towards Pella. He says, pray that the weather will be in your favor. That's what that means. He says, pray that it will not be occurring on a Sabbath, because you're going to have all of this. Suddenly you're going to have to run further than the laws of the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees would allow you to run. Yes, less than a mile on a Sabbath day. In other words, you're going to have to you'll be violating the Sabbath. If this happens on a Saturday Jewish Sabbath, then you're going to have Jews getting in your way trying to stop you from violating the Sabbath because of the distance you've got to go to get out of that area of Judea where the Roman armies are and get yourself on up to Pella. You see what's happening? This is what Jesus is talking about right here. See, this is ridiculous, isn't it, to think that, what if Jesus was supposed to be coming back like now, here, in the year 2014 when we're shooting this, here in America, right? It's ridiculous. What does that have to do? Pray that your flight is not on the Sabbath. Well, we're not under the Sabbath. That kind of constraint is not upon us any longer in the church. That wouldn't see, that has nothing to do with us. See, do you see? 21, for then there will be great tribulation, thlipsos megas, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Now, when he makes that type of a statement, that this kind of a thing has never occurred and never will occur again, he's referring to what's happening in Jerusalem, the great tribulation there in Jerusalem in those days. He's not saying that there's never going to be in future history. There already has been incredible disasters, wars. Just think of the Second World War. As one case in point, or Vietnam for that matter, the amount of human life lost or something like that. So this is talking about then. By the way, make a note of Daniel 12 in verse 1 right there, because Daniel 12 talks about this. Jesus is getting this information that he just said, that this will be a time of great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. That's taken directly from Daniel 12:1. You should look at it, make a note of it, look at it. Here Daniel says, now at that time, and that time is in reference to the end of the 11th chapter, where he's already gone through prophetically the different nations that would rule after the Medes and the Persians. He's talked about the Greeks. He's talked about Alexander the Great dying in a sense, and his 4 generals taking over. He's talked about now the Romans taking over world dominion. This is all a part of Daniel chapter 2 when he sees that great Colossus and he gets the interpretation. Nebuchadnezzar gets the interpretation from Daniel, and you, O king, are that head of gold. Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, that head of gold, and then followed by the Medes and the Persians, arms and breasts of silver, followed by the Greeks, belly and thighs of brass, followed by the 2 legs with the 10 toes, that's out of iron, that's Rome, and then the toes mixed with clay and iron, meaning it's very brittle, it doesn't hold together, and the 10 toes is a reference to the 10-nation confederacy that was under Rome, under Rome's control in the 1st century, and it was a very tentative kind of control. It wasn't really solid, and there's reasons for that. Oh, we'll be talking about that in our Revelation study on Sunday mornings. You just need to get yourself on out here. By the way, some of you said, oh my gosh, if I lived in the area, man, I'd attend this church, Is there anything I can do, anywhere I can go, kind of a thing? No, you're going to have to move here. You're going to have to move here. You really are. Omaha is such a great place. If you got kids, this is the place to raise your kids. This is the church to be at. This is it. Everything else, I don't know what to tell you. No, I'm not kidding. I mean, some of you need to just kind of sell where you're at, and make the move, bust a move, and get to Omaha. Okay, all right. I just had to say that a little bit here. All right, now look, Daniel 12:1. Now at that time, that's the time he's talking about, Michael, this is Michael the archangel, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people will arise. Now the Hebrew, very interesting right there, because the Hebrew can give the idea that Michael who guards the sons of your people, it's a reference to Israel, those who were known as Israel at this time, that he will arise. It has the idea of he is releasing, maybe letting go, maybe allowing for a certain thing to happen. And then we get verse 2. And then we get the rest of verse 1. And there will be, after he lets go, there will be a time of distress. Listen to this now. Such as has never occurred since there was a nation until that time. And at that time, your people, that's the Jews, everyone who is found written in the book, that's the Lamb's book of life, these are those who are the elect, will be rescued. Oh, when you see all these things happening, look up, for your redemption is drawing nigh. Oh, go back. So I can't take too long because I'm already blowing it here. So that's what it's talking about. He's pulling in verse 21 of Matthew 24. He's actually pulling this from Daniel 12:1, which gives us the understanding that Jesus is authorizing his interpretation of the book of Daniel, as in verse 15 that he pulls out of Daniel, as in verse 21 that he pulls out of Daniel. He's saying, you better take my interpretation of this because this is correct. Anything other than this, and oh my gosh, it is exactly what preterists refer to. It is the preterist interpretation. Preter, that which is fulfilled in the past, in other words. See, Jesus is a preterist. All right. Verse 22. And unless those days had been cut short, Jesus says, no life or no soul would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will cut short. Didn't we just read that at the end of Daniel 12 and verse 1? Yeah! All those who will be rescued, those whose names are written in the book, will be rescued. It's the same thing as what rescue is referring to. Being saved out of this destruction. It doesn't mean being saved as in justification by faith. That's not in this context. Soter, the Greek word for save, or sozo, is in reference to being delivered out of this judgment of disaster there in Jerusalem. I'd like to spend some time on this phrase cutting short, but I want to keep going. 23. Then if anyone says to you, behold, here's the Messiah, or there he is, do not believe him. For false Christs, false prophets will arise, will show great signs and wonders, so as to mislead, if possible, even the elect. So false Christs, false prophets would arise to deceive even the very elect. In other words, it's possible that the very elect, God's ones whose names are written in the book, Daniel 12:1, right? That even they could be deceived at this time. And of course, there's lots of examples of false messiahs and especially false prophets in the book of Acts. But I won't spend more time, going through. Remember, Jesus is saying this is what you guys are going to experience during this time. 25, behold, I have told you in advance. Second person plural on that word. I have told all of you in advance. So if they say to all of you, verse 26, behold, he is in the wilderness, do not go. Or, behold, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe them. For just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so will the coming, that's parousia, of the Son of Man be. Lightning flashing from the east to the west. Very dramatic, very strong. I mean, when the lightning flashes in the sky, the land is flat, and the sky is the way it is very turbulent in that part of the world. Yeah. But remember, Jesus is using Hebraism again here. He's using Hebraic language because the idea of lightning flashing has to do throughout the Old Testament with a symbol or a sign of judgment. Judgment is either impending or judgment is about to happen. So Jesus is saying that his parousia, his coming, is bringing a judgment. And by the way, let me speak to partial preterists for a second. Partial preterism says that the coming of Christ in AD 70 was not his so-called second coming, but was rather his judgment coming. They would say that he came to bring judgment, but that he's going to come yet in the future. The problem with that is that there is no scripture that separates his AD 70 judgment coming from any kind of a future coming, second coming. Which, by the way, if that's the case, then the second coming is not a second coming. It's a third coming, isn't it? Yeah, see, they're all here. It will be a third, which is completely unbiblical. I got no scripture for a third coming. I'm sorry. So that's very important to understand this. See, I was a partial preterist before I was a full preterist. And see, the full I've got to be careful here right now because I do not claim to be a full preterist in today's meaning because the full preterists have managed to bring along so much incorrect baggage from just bad exegesis. In other words, most of these people are not well trained, they're not well grounded, they hold on to all kinds of presuppositions that screw them up. Arminianistic presupposition, baptismal regenerationist presuppositions, there is no hell, so annihilationist presuppositions. When Jesus ascended into heaven, he put off his raised body, which means he's no longer a man, which by the way means that you can't be saved anymore because only a man goes on to mediate for other men. There's a whole thing. Anyway, those are just some quick examples right there. They have tossed this stuff, the realities, to the side and accepted things and brought things in that I can't go with. See, and there's a reason that I'm within the Reformed realm, and I'm a Calvinist. There's a reason for this. It's because that's what the Bible teaches. Now, you don't have to agree with that right now, and it's okay because I used to be where you're at right now. But the Lord will help you in this regard. Man, I don't like the way he's talking to me. He sounds like he's like all arrogant and this kind of a thing. I'm sorry. Listen to me, okay? Listen very carefully to me. I'll be 56 in May. I'll be 57 in May. 57 years old in May. I've already had my chest cracked open. I don't have time for this anymore. And see the shoulder? Straight from the shoulder, okay? Listen very carefully to me, all right? The Arminian theology will lead to universalism. Arminian theology is rife with its God wants you to use your free will, and the free will is autonomous, and all bow to the almighty powerful free will of men and women. The problem is that it's not your will that's in question, it's your nature that's in question. The man in his fallen nature cannot and will not believe salvifically or choose to believe salvifically on the Lord Jesus Christ. They can't do it. 1 Corinthians 2:14 says that. John 1 verse 12, 13, and 14 speaks about that, but especially verse 13. See, you are saved not by the will of the flesh, not by the will of man, but by the will of God. All right. Now that's part and parcel. Preterism fits into this. Biblical preterism fits into this. But biblical preterism, you're going to have a tough time with your soteriology if you're Arminian. It's not going to work. You're going to have to make things up. You're going to have to make things up in this book to try to make your Arminian soteriology fit with your fulfilled eschatology or your preterism. So, the reason I said all that is to say this. When I became a preterist, I don't know how long I've been a preterist now, 15, 16 years, I don't know. But I became a full preterist. Prior to that, I was a partial preterist. And this is what I started saying earlier, okay, 5 minutes ago or whatever it was. The partial preterism thing started falling apart for me because I couldn't find this idea of a third coming. I couldn't find how that the Bible separates a judgment coming in AD 70 and then looks towards a yet future to that, off in our future, third coming, to be the actual second coming. Now, there's a lot of Reform guys who are partial preterist, and you know why? Because partial preterism within the Reformed allows them to hold on to their creeds, especially the Westminster Confession of Faith, which we use here at Messiah Reformed Church. That's our link to the Reformed tradition. We don't take everything that it says. Remember, it's a creed, or rather, it's a confession. It's a confession. We confess those things that are exegetically accurate. It's not perfect, and it shouldn't be treated as that. But we're in the Reformed camp. We're in the Reformed family through that means. Even though there are some Reformed denominations that would never take me on, that would never accept this church. But that's okay. That's their loss, is the way I see that. So the full preterism of today, because it has all this additional material, is not what I am. But I am the full preterist of 15, 16 years ago. Very little of my eschatology has changed, and what has changed has been corrected for the better, I believe. But there hasn't been these incredible, changes that have gone on right here. So I say this to you, full preterists. You can't legitimately be a partial preterist. I speak to you, partial preterists. You can't be a legitimate partial preterist and hold on to a part A coming, part A of the, maybe half of him shows up in AD 70 and the other half shows up, at the end of the so-called end of the world or the end of time. Problems. He says, I've told you, verse 23, I've told all of you in advance. So if they say to you, behold, he's in the wilderness, do not go out. Behold, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe them. For just as the lightning, verse 27, comes from the east, flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. This is a synonym for God bringing judgment. Now, I'm not going to roll you through it right now. Verse 31. That was just a pipe dream, evidently. But I do want you to write some of these down. I want you to write down the verses that give you the background to this Hebraistic phrase, where Jesus is pulling it from, so you and I understand a little bit better why he's using this phrase. He's talking about his coming as lightning, and it's in reference to a judgment right here. But judgment and second coming go together. They're not separated. They go together. They happen simultaneously, all right? Just write these down. 2 Samuel 22. Verse 14, verse 15. 2 Samuel 22, verse 14 and 15. Job 37, verses 1 through 5. Job 37, verses 1 through 5. Psalm 144, verses 5 through 6. 144th Psalm, verses 5 through 6. Ezekiel 1, 13 through 14. Ezekiel 1, 13 through 14. One more. Zechariah 9, verses 13 through 14. Zechariah 9, verses 13 through 14. Now watch how interesting this is. He speaks of the judgment coming like lightning. Everybody would understand this. This is God bringing a judgment, because that's how God in the Old Testament would symbolize and signify his judgments upon the people. It would be through the means of the sign of lightning, and he ties it directly to the coming of the Son of Man. Now verse 28. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Now what does that mean? What's a corpse? Well, of course, a dead body. The vultures will gather, okay? What a picture. By the way, corpse here, or I should say vultures, is the same Greek word that can be translated as eagles. Or, I mean, either way. The Greek word could be eagles, it could be vultures. Context, I think New American Standard right here is correct. They've chosen vultures because it's the idea of the picture of a dead body out in the middle of the desert, right? Like the dead body of Judaism, the dead body typified by the city of Jerusalem and all the dead bodies therein that will take place here, and the dead corpse of their building. Because what's Jesus been saying? Chapter 23, verse 34, verse 35. He's going to bring judgment upon all the scribes and the Pharisees of the first century, the blood that has been shed from Abel to Zechariah. He says in verse 38, behold, your house is left unto you desolate, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent unto them. Right? Your house is left unto you desolate. 24:2, not one stone will be left upon another, which will not be torn down. This is pretty strong, isn't it? Verse 15, therefore when you see the abomination of desolation, right? We know what that is now. Luke 21, verse 20, therefore when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its desolation is near. So this is pretty plain, isn't it? So by the time we get to verse 28, wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Now, this is not the only place where Jesus said this. If you slip back to Luke 17, and he actually does it prior to this, in the historicity of the timing of these statements, in verse 37. Luke 17 and verse 37. And by the way, Luke 17, verse 37, and we're actually 17 from verse 22 all the way to 37, is sort of a mini Olivette Discourse, and it gives everything in the same timeline of events that's all going to happen to the people in the first century. But here, in verse 35, for instance, or 34, Jesus says, I tell all of you, because the you there is always second person plural, on that night, and he's been talking about, when the judgment comes. I'll let you read it for yourself. But he says, on that night in Jerusalem, there will be two in one bed, one will be taken, the other left. There will be two women grinding at the same place, one will be taken, the other left. Focus in on the word taken. One will be taken, the other left. One will be taken, the other left. Rapturists just get all kinds of gas mileage out of this, One will be taken. Rapture! No, it's not the rapture. One will be taken, the other one will be left. Left. The one who is left is the one who's actually being saved. The one who was taken is being taken into judgment. Let me show it to you. He says one will be taken, the other left. Verse 36 is not in Luke's original. It's not in Papyrus 75. That's a 3rd century Matthean document. It's not in Sinaiticus. It's not Alexandrinus. It's not in Vaticanus. Those are all 4th century unsealed manuscripts. It doesn't show up until manuscript D, and that's a 5th century manuscript. We're better than 500 years removed before all of the copies of Matthew and Luke, right? Luke in particular are being made. Copy, hundreds upon hundreds of them, right? And this thing doesn't show up till some over 500 years later. No. So verse 36 was added back in through the Byzantine multiplication of manuscripts motif that was going on from about the 9th century through the 12th century. Another subject for another time. I just hate leaving you without some kind of an explanation. If I say that wasn't originally there, then you're kind of left hanging. Like, what does that mean? I try to give you a little bit of something. So what you want to do is you want to rewind all that stuff I just said real fast, slow it down so you can hear everything, and then you can make comparisons. You can go to books by Metzger, or Kurt Aland, or, so there's just loads of manuscript-related books that talk about this. Now watch. So one will be taken, the other will be left. One will be taken, the other will be left. Taken where? Because that's exactly what the boys are going to ask Jesus. Look at verse 37. And answering, they, that's the disciples in this context, said to him, where, Lord? Where what? Well, not where are they left, but where are they taken? Where are they being taken? And Jesus answers, where the body is, there the vultures will be gathered. Dead corpse. In other words, those who are taken, it's not a rapture. It's not an escape valve. They're taken to be judged. They're going to be killed. These are the dead Jewish bodies littered throughout Jerusalem, throughout the picture here of the desert. Because you remember, when Cestus Gallus and his army started coming down into the north end of Judea and coming down towards Jerusalem, they were killing Jews, I mean, just by the hundreds and the thousands, all the way through all the Jewish cities, from Galilee all the way down. That's a historical fact. And I mean, the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee was running red colored with blood, with all the bodies that were killed out there, thrown out there. The book of Revelation talks about that too. When it talks about the sea being turned to blood, it's a reference to Cestus Gallus and the Roman armies, killing all the people, casting them into the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. And they kept coming down, and all these bodies, literally, and the vultures. You get the picture, don't you? Because we've seen plenty of Westerns, right? So it's the same kind of idea. All right, back to 24. What a shame. I think that's enough, because I really need you now. If I start getting into 29 through 31, I need some time, and I need you to be with me on this. So we did pretty good. We did most of it anyway. Okay, that's really good. So I'm happy with that. All right, we got pretty far. But now what we'll do is, like next week, then we're going to pick up, well, no, we're going to do Q&A next week. So the week after that, we'll start at verse 29 and try to take you all the way down as far as we possibly can. But next time we're in this, we're going to start dealing with verse 29, where he talks about immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its lights, the stars will fall from the sky, powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear, the Greek says, in heaven. Not in the sky, not in the heaven. The sign of the Son of Man appears in heaven. Where does the sign appear? In heaven. En urano. In heaven. Not on the earth. I'm sorry. Are you okay? Let's read that again. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. There is no definite article in the Greek text. My New American Standard says in the sky. That's a mistake. The sign of the Son of Man appears not up in the sky, but in heaven. That's directly linked. I'm giving you a preview, okay? That's directly linked to Daniel 7:13 and 14. You should cross-reference Matthew 24:30 with the sign of the Son of Man appearing in heaven to Daniel 7:13 and 14, and you will go, oh my gosh, it's the same thing. And then all the tribes of the land, land, not earth, as if tribes in Australia, tribes in Canada, tribes in the United States. No. It's contemporary. These my contemporaries, the tribes that are there, that are left in the land of Israel, will mourn. And it says they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the heaven with power and great glory. Same thing he said to the members of the Sanhedrin in Matthew 26:64. He said, all of you will see me coming on the clouds of heaven. And they remember, they ripped their clothes and everything. They said he's blasphemed because only God comes in the clouds. They knew he was claiming to be God. See? And that's how they were able to administer the result of the death penalty on him. Jesus had to give that to them. He had to give himself to them in that way, see? But then they had to get past Pilate. That was something else altogether. But see, when it says they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, well, wait a minute, Pastor. Doesn't that mean right there that doesn't that mean that they would be seeing him? You know, the word for see right there, you should probably try to look that up if you can. You should try to look that up, because see does not always mean with the eyes, eyesight. I see you, I see a bird in the sky, I see a 747 coming through the clouds, I see it. It also has to do with understanding. has to do with revelation. It has to do with experiencing a thing. Now, Jesus already said that this temple is going to be thrown down, that the sign of the end would be, the temple would be thrown down, but there was another sign that would be prior to that. You remember what that was? The gospel going out into the entire oikumene, verse 14. Remember we saw that? That's another sign that would proceed the second coming. And here at the top of verse 30, the sign of the Son of Man appears not in the sky, there's no definite article, appears in heaven is the Greek text. The sign appears in heaven. And the sign that appears in heaven is Daniel 7, verses 13 and 14. You check it out. You check it out. And Daniel 7, 13 and 14 doesn't have, Jesus is given the kingdom. It's given from the Ancient of Days to the Lord Jesus, from the Father to the Son. And he doesn't leave. He doesn't leave. All right, let me give you this real quick and we're done. In Acts 1, verses 9 and 10, actually it's verses 9 through 11. Acts 1, verses 9 through 11. Jesus is ascending. It's at the end of the 40-day period after his resurrection. Jesus is ascending, right? And the boys are looking up into the sky, and they see a cloud receive him out of their sight. And the two angels appear, and they said, "Men of Galilee, what are you doing staring up into the sky?" Listen to what the angels say about the nature of the second coming. "This same Jesus whom you have seen leaving will return or come back in the same way you saw him go." Now they say that in verse 11, Acts 1:11. Well, verse 9 tells us how he went. And it says he went in a cloud out of their sight. He will then return the same way, the angels say to the boys. In a cloud out of their sight. Matthew 24:30, then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. The parousia is not about a 6-foot-tall Galilean coming out of the sky and landing, like a moon rover on the planet's surface. It's much bigger than that. You say, man, I guess I see what some of the things you're saying, but man, I don't know. See, that's why I need more time with you in this section. We need to take more time with you in regards, because I'm going to expand on this. And when we get to verse 31, which we will do after we do the Q&A section next week, so we're 2 weeks away from this, if you're, watching this in order in, what is today, February the 11th, 12th? Today's the 10th? How come I always wanted to make it to go faster? 11. It is the 11th? Okay, well, in any case, of the year 2014, right? Hopefully, you're moving along with us in regards to this stuff. When we get to verse 31, it says that he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet when this happens, and will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven, not the sky, the heaven, to the other. So the elect are gathered from one end of heaven to the other. The elect are gathered by the angels from one end of heaven to the other. Wait a minute, aren't these elect guys all on the earth? Isn't this interesting? Because all this has to do, when you get into verse 31, that's when I'm going to start talking to you about a little subject called chronotology. Chronotology, it's the study of time and timelessness and God's eternal realm and where he did this gathering from, see? And I'm going to show you through the scripture how that God's eternal now operates within this Matthew 24 and verse 31, and how that no matter where you were born on this earth, in earthly time, in earthly created time, that in AD 70, in the spiritual heavenly realm, God gathered his elect. He knew who you would be, obviously, and he gathered you unto himself at that time. And that's going to cross-reference with 1 Thessalonians, the 4th chapter, when we deal with the harpazo event right there. And the result of the harpazo, or the so-called rapture, bad word, it's from Latin, has nothing to do with harpazo. But the result of the harpazo is the result of this act of God in this heavenly, timeless realm, the eternal now of God, where he brings all of his elect unto himself, that is Christ, unto himself. The beauty of all of this has to do with the fact that at the end of 1 Thessalonians 4, it says, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. We let that go by so easily, that phrase, because it requires God's movement of taking us in the eternal now, in his eternal time realm. I know you haven't even been born yet, right? But he, just like he elects you before time, right? So he draws you to himself outside of time, Matthew 24:31, and there's your security. That's how you know you will always be with the Lord. That's what I always tell people. I always ask Christians, I say, you know, that sense of assurance that you have, that the scriptures give you, that sense of assurance, the power of that, I know I'm always going to be with the Lord, right? That feeling that you have, you know where that comes from and why that happens? It happens because Jesus already came back. It happens because 1 Thessalonians 4 verses 15 through 18 already happened. Because Matthew 24 already happened. So you can see already why, you know, I need more time to get you through this. And I want to build this up and really help you in regards to this. Okay, so I've probably gained some audience tonight, but no doubt I've lost, okay, he's a Looney Tunes, you know, what the heck is he talking about right here? You know, we'll come back in 2 weeks, and that will be episode 17. It's episode 17. And you'll hear all about it then. And then remember, don't judge a book by its cover. And don't judge Dr. Birks by his great sense of dressing style either. Okay, we are done. Thank you very, very much for listening to us. Remember, you can get to me on drkellynelsonburks.com. That's our website. I encourage you to go there. And you can talk to me directly through email by mailing to me anything you would like. Nothing too provocative, please, at ktestifiedtotruth@aol.com. Go to Facebook and check out Messiah Church page right there. That's very important. And then also don't forget to do the Twitter thing and at Dr. Kelly Birks. I always have to kind of look sideways to my elder over here to make sure I'm getting that down right there. All right, and then join us next week. That would be, let's see, what would the date then be a week from today? That would be the 18th? The 18th. February 18th of 2014. I have to say that because I don't know at what time in life you're watching this. And we're going to have our probably at least the first of our Q&As then. So, this is Dr. Kelly Nelson Birks, really seriously wanting you to study, be in the Word, and be filled with God's blessing and his hope and his peace throughout all the days of your life. And move to Omaha. This is the place to be. Bye-bye.